They don't even notice what they're doing to you. You sit quietly, nodding, holding your breath while the room feels heavier by the second. You tell yourself to be patient, to be kind, to understand, but deep down something aches. You're trying to stay close to people well, make your soul feel far away from itself. You've given so many chances. You've rewritten stories just to make others look better in them. You've made excuse for their silence, explained away their coldness, justified their disrespect as or just how they are, and still here you are exhausted, confused, and strangely guilty for even thinking about walking away. Carl Jung said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." He didn't just mean situations, he meant the way we grip on two people no longer fit us. The way we stay in dynamics that shrink our spirit. The way we fear detaching because we think attaching means becoming heartless. But what if it doesn't? What if detaching is not the death of love, but the return of dignity? What if detaching isn't about cutting others off, but cutting through the illusion that you owe them your best? Let's start there. Since childhood, most of us were taught one thing about connection. Stick it out. Forgive quickly. Don't abandon people. Be loyal. Be the bigger person. But what no one told you is that this massage without wisdom can destroy your inner world. You become the one who carries too much. You're the one who explains away behavior that cuts you, who stays even when your nervous system is screaming to leave. You think you're being kind, but what you're actually doing is betraying yourself. Loyalty without boundaries turns into self-abandonment, and Carl Jung believed that every time silence the inner signal, that discomfort, the unease, the quiet dread, we're drifting further from our truth. Because your soul doesn't speak in it speaks in feelings. And when it feels unsafe, unheard, unseen, it doesn't lie. So, if your body tightens around certain people, if your energy fades in certain rooms, if your heart feels like it's holding its breath when certain names light up your phone, that's not overreacting. That's remembering. Space hears the myth. People think detaching minds turning cold, becoming distant, cutting off anyone who causes. But Jung's view was different. He believed real detachment is not about walls. It's about space. The kind of space that allows you to no longer be consumed by another's chaos, to observe your feelings without drowning in them. Detachment is not the absence of care. It's the presence of clarity. You can still love someone and walk away. You can still understand someone and protect your peace. You can even forgive someone and never speak to them again. That's not cruelty. That's maturity, and it's hard, especially when you were trained to equate love with suffering. But Jung's work reminds us, if the relationship requires you to lose yourself, to keep it alive, then you are not in love. You are in survival. And survival love always comes with a cost. Your joy, your sleep, your confidence, your dreams. How much longer will you keep paying? One of the biggest traps we fall into is this belief. If I just say it the right way, they'll change. If I stay a little longer, they'll see what they're doing. If I love them harder, they'll finally love me, right? But that belief is built on a lie that you are responsible for someone else healing. You're not. You can support. You can listen, you can hold space, but you cannot carry. And Carl Jung would say, the moment you confuse your identity with the fixer, you've stepped out of your own life and into someone else's shadow. You're not here to bear their therapist. You're not here to earn their love through endurance. You're neither to be emotionally held hostage by hope that one day they'll treat you right. Real detachment is when you finally let go of the outcome. When you stop scripting their redemption arc in your head. When you understand people didn't change because you love them. They change because they change. And until they do, your peace must come first. People don't change now. Here's where it gets deeper. That person you can't stop thinking about. The one you keep going back. Toven, though you know better. The one whose words echo in your mind at night. They're not just a person. They're a symbol. A symbol of an old story you haven't rewritten yet. Maybe it's the father who never made you feel. The mother who only loved you when you were useful. The friend wholly fled, without warning, making you feel unworthy of explanation. Jung believed that we are drawn to people, not just because of who they are, but because of what they awaken in us. If you find yourself chasing validation from someone cold, it might be by so you were raised to believe love had Tobe earned. If you keep trying to prevail worth in relationships, maybe it's because your earliest attachments taught you that being loved meant being useful, not simply being. You're not just attached to the person. You're attached to the story your nervous system wrote long before them. That's why detaching feels like death. Because to let them go is to finally face the pain underneath. Waiting for closure. Sometimes we wait. We wait for closure effort, a sincere apology for the other person to acknowledge the damage. But that's another trap. You don't need their apology to begin detaching. You don't need their validation to make your pain real. You don't need their understanding to prove your side of the story. Healing is a solo act, and detachment, real detachment, begins when you stop needing them to confirm your reality. Jung would call this individuation, the process of becoming whole in yourself, separate from the roles, masks, and illusions you've carried. You're not the version of yourself HOAs made small to be loved. You're not the version who stayed quiet to avoid conflict. You're not the version who confessed approval with affection. You wear someone deeper, someone who remembers what it feels like to belong to yourself. And that is who detachment helps you return to. Who detachment helps people will call you cold. They'll see you changed. They'll say you gave up too easily, even though you gave chance after chance, conversation after conversation, emotional labor after emotional labor. But Jung knew the truth is a strange way of sounding cruel to people who are used to lies, and silence has a strange way of being threatened into those who used to control you. When you stop over-explaining, when you stop defending your decisions, when you stop softening your truth for the comfort of others, you are finally free. Because here's the secret. You never needed to detach from them. You only needed to detach from the version of yourself that thought you had to stay. What detachment really means, that's where most people get stuck. They think, if I detach, what's left? No person, no familiar drama, no one touch us, or save, or fix. Just you, and that's terrifying base. Many of us were never taught how to exist without emotional entanglement. We were taught to define ourselves by how useful we are to others, by how loyal, how patient, how forgiving. But here's the truth. Your worth is not measured by your endurance. Your identity is not built from Samir Nils's chaos. Your life does not need Tobe a battlefield for proving love. When you detach, you don't become less loving. You become less available to people who confuse a love with control. You don't become more you become more at home within you. And for the first time, maybe, you can finally hear your own voice beneath the noise you thought you're hard to fix. But there's still something deeper waiting, because letting go isn't just the end of a connection. It's the beginning of something even harder. Facing the part of yourself that keeps picking pain and calling it love. And if you're willing to go there, you're about to uncover what detachment really means. You didn't notice it at first. The way you said yes when you wanted to say no. The way you smiled when you felt unseen. The way you stayed silent just to keep the peace, even when your heart felt like it was screaming inside. Somewhere along the line, you learn it, that your safety depends on how small you can become. Not physically small, but emotionally invisible, polite, helpful, easy to love. You thought that was strength, but Jung would call this something else entirely, a mask. A survival mask built from fear, guilt, and the deep belief that love must always cost something. How it starts, here's how it starts. Someone crosses a boundary. You feel uncomfortable. Butan's Ted of protecting yourself. You tell yourself, they didn't mean it like that. They're just going through something. I don't want to make things worse. So, you stay. You call it love. But that guilt, it's not your conscience talking. It's sire conditioning. Carl Jung believed that guilt, when distorted, becomes a tool of control. Especially in childhood, when you were praised for being easy, punished for being too much, and rewarded when you ignored your needs to serve. You were trained to confuse guilt with goodness, and now, as an adult, any step toward your own peace feels selfish, even when someone is clearly disrespecting you, even when staying is slowly breaking you. That's not love. That's emotional confusion disguised as compassion. The hardest thing about detachment, one of the hardest things about detachment, is this. You feel like you have to explain yourself. Why you stopped calling, why you stopped replying, why your energy has shifted. But let's be honest, if someone really saw your pain, you wouldn't need to explain anything. You wouldn't need to write essays to justify your need for space. You wouldn't need to rehearse a speech to make your exit feel fair. People who genuinely care about you don't demand explanations when you choose peace. They feel it. They get it. They respect it. And the ones who don't, they were never listening in the first place. Carl Jung warned against deforming healing for others, because our true healing isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't come with a PowerPoint. It's quiet, subtle, sacred. You don't need to justify your boundary. You don't need to convince them you're not being mean. You're allowed to simply walk away. And that silence is your freedom. Being cared for. Some of us didn't grow up being cared. We grew up being the caretaker. You were the one who checked if everyone was ek. You were the one who cleaned up the emotional mess. You were the one who stayed calm while others lost control. But here's the truth. When you grow up in that role, your nervous system starts believing that love means responsibility. So when you try to detach, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like abandonment. Not because you're abandoning others, but because a part of you thinks you're betraying your purpose. And Jung would say, this is one of the deepest illusions of the human psyche, that you were put here to fix what hurt you. You aren't. You are not the therapist of your family. You are not the emotional anchor for your partner. You are not there for the bridge, the rescuer. You are allowed to be a person, not a role. You are allowed to want peace, not performance. You are allowed to choose rest, not rescue missions. And you are allowed to detach from anything that makes you forget that people get. And this part hurts, because once you start detaching, something terrifying happens. People get angry, not because you hurt them, but because you stopped letting them hurt you. They say you've changed, that you've become cold, that you're acting. But here's what they really. You're no longer doing what you want. You're no longer reacting the way I'm used to. You're no longer letting me control the emotional tone of your life. Carl Jung wrote that when you finally reclaim your boundaries, it threatens the entire ecosystem of those who benefited from your lack of them. Your silence disrupts their control. Your peace challenges their chaos. Your distance forces them to sit with themselves, something they've avoided their entire life. So, of course, they'll lash out. Of course, they'll make you question yourself. Of course, they'll guilt trip you into staying small. But that's not your truth to carry. You're innate, hard to love. You're just harder to manipulate now. And that is a good thing. Detachment is a muscle you don't detach once and suddenly feel free. Detachment is not a switch. It's a muscle. Some days you'll feel strong. Other days, a song, a photo, a text will send you spiraling back into emotion. And that's okay. Carl Jung didn't teach emotional perfection. He taught awareness, consciousness, the courage to look at what's happening in you and choose differently. So, if you feel yourself slipping into old patterns, if you start romanticizing the person you had to leave, if you begin doubting your growth just because you feel pain, pause, breathe, remind yourself feeling pain doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. It means you care deeply and you're healing even deeper. Your emotions are not setbacks. And detachment means learning how to listen without letting them lead. You became heartless. One of the saddest lies you might believe is that you became heartless. That by walking away you became cruel. That by not replying you became selfish. That by choosing silence you became indifferent. But that's not with that. You became quiet because talking didn't work anymore. You became distant because closeness was costing too much. You became protective because you were tired of being Detachment was never about punishing anyone. It was about remembering that your heart is not a rent. It's a home. And not everyone deserves the key. It's a home. This is one of the strangest gifts of detachment, clarity. When you stop emotionally bombasting people, when you stop rescuing them from the consequences of their behavior, when you stop filling in the blanks with hope instead of reality, you start to see them for who they actually are, not who you needed them to be. Some people only looked kind because you were generous with your interpretations. Some people only seemed loving because you ignored their patterns. Some people only felt special because you gave them access to a heart they didn't know how to hold. Carl Jung said that the greatest tragedy isn't losing others. It's realizing you lost yourself trying to keep them. And when you finally detach, it's like a fog lifts. The same word that once made your heart skip now sound. The same gestures that felt affectionate now feel manipulative. The same presence that once comforted you now drains you. That isn't bitterness. That's awakening. And that's where healing begins. Grief, we expect relief. But sometimes what comes first is grief. Because even toxic attachments carry memories. Even painful relationships hold fleeting sweetness. Even harmful dynamics can feel like home. And walking away doesn't just end a relationship. It ends a fantasy. The version of the story where they would finally choose you, change for you, understand you. But Jung said maturity begins when you stop waiting for the story to change and start writing your own. So grief comes. You grieve the version of yourself who begged for love. You grieve the effort you poured into empty hands. You grieve the time, the energy, the dreams, and then, slowly, peace arrives. Not loud, not sudden, quiet, gentle, real. A love that comes from within. A strength no one gave you 'cause you built it yourself. But one question lingers. Because even when you let go of people, something harder remains. What if the real attachment is to the pain itself? Jung believed we don't just cling to people, we cling to patterns. And often, the person you can't leave isn't the cause, they're the trigger. They stir up something old, something unfinished. It's not just them you miss. It's the drama, the ache, the familiar role you once played, caretaker, fixer, overlover, the one who bends. And without that role, who are you? Quiet, whole, free. It sounds beautiful, but to someone raised in chaos, peace feels unbearable. That's why healing rarely feels like joy at first. It feels like emptiness. And in that emptiness, your shadow speaks. Go back. At least there you knew who you were. But Jung would remind you that voice is not truth. It's memory, and memory is not a reason to return. You've already proven you can survive storms. Now prove you can live in stillness, because real detachment doesn't mean coldness. It doesn't mean isolation. It means self-love. It means waking up without checking who texted, smiling without needing someone to notice, hearing your own thoughts, and no longer silencing them for someone else's comfort. You don't owe the world your suffering to prove you have a heart. You just need to listen to it. So if these words spoke to you, if you saw yourself in them, share the moment when you finally chose peace. And if you want more than surface-level inspiration, if you want the kind of deep psychology that speaks to the soul, subscribe now. Because this journey isn't just about letting go of others. It's about learning to return to yourself, and that is where everything begins.